Hello everyone, I am the Bandit Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing 2 takes on a commander from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, Isshin 2 Heavens is 1. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Isshin is a 3/4 human samurai for 1 red, 1 white, and 1 black. What's great about this casting cost being so cheap is that we don't have to worry too much about protecting Isshin, since we can feasibly cast him multiple times in a game. Isshin is similar to Wolfgar of Icewind Dale in that he increases by 1 the triggered abilities that happen whenever a creature attacks. However, Isshin is vastly superior to Wolfgar, not only because Isshin has access to additional color, swapping green for both white and black, but Isshin does this for any creature that's attacking, not just your own. This makes for an incredibly versatile commander since you're not just limited to your own creatures when attacking. If any of your opponent's creatures attacking would trigger your permanents, they trigger an additional time as well. This lends Isshin to be built in multiple effective ways. While the focus of this video is making the most of your own triggers while peppering in the best effects that trigger when opponent's creatures attack, you can also do the converse and focus around your opponent's attackers while peppering in some of your own triggered effects. So before getting into the main focus of the video, I will still cover an alternate way of playing Isshin, since that one is just as fun, while admittedly possibly being more interesting. As I just mentioned, Isshin increases the triggers of your permanents for all attackers. So if you run a lot of attack deterrent effects but your opponents still decide to attack you, those effects are essentially doubled, potentially deterring them even further. Thanks to Crown of Doom and Calculating Lich, you can potentially deal further damage to opponents during combat. Crown of Doom is super busted with Isshin since each creature attacking its controller is essentially getting a +4/+0 pump, which is nothing to scoff at. However, this can also get rid of forced attackers since it's not pumping toughness, but we'll get into that in greater detail later on. The Lich is great since the opponent is losing 2 life per attacker, so if anyone's attacking one of your opponents with a swarm or weenies of tokens, they will lose a considerable amount of life, both from the Lich and the fact that they're getting Alpha Strike. Speaking of swarm of tokens, Combat Calligrapher is a great way to give your opponent's creatures to smack themselves with. Each time a player attacks one of your opponents, they'll get 2 2/1 flyers that are already attacking. So unfortunately, they won't trigger anything that does so upon declaration of attackers. That being said, if you're forcing attack, then those doubled tokens will definitely add up. Speaking of forced combat, what better way to get the most of those triggered effects than by forcing them to happen? And then getting yet another trigger with Isshin. Goad is the best way to go since those creatures are forced to attack but can't attack you. Vengeful Ancestor, Karazakar the Eye Tyrant, Geode Rager, Grenzo Havoc Razor, Komainu Battle Armor, Disrupt Decorum, Bloodthirsty Blade, Martial Impetus, Parasitic Impetus, and Shiny Impetus are the best goad effects you can run in Isshin, if this is the route you want to take. Vengeful Ancestor takes it a step further by hurting your opponents whenever their goaded creatures attack, which is triggering an additional time thanks to Isshin, but also compounded by the rest of the similar effects in the build. Karazakar hurts both us and the opponent, but it's worth it since we get to draw 2 cards too, although our opponent does as well, so keep that in mind. However, we're able to tap down and goad 2 of their creatures thanks to Isshin, so it also helps to tap down potential blockers for our own attackers. So this beholder does more things that can be seen at first glance. Grenzo has the option of goading a creature or stealing the top card of an opponent's library. However, this is only upon combat damage being dealt, so it won't trigger Isshin. The 3 impetus do trigger Isshin though. The white one giving all attackers +2/+2 with Isshin out, which is a very decent pump. The black one drains the opponent for a potential 4 life, and the red one can potentially get us 2 treasure tokens for some nice ramp. We can also force attack without goad, but it's a bit risky. But we can get into how to deter those attacks in a moment. Maddening Imp, Total War, Goblin Spymaster, Instigator, Curse of the Nightly Hunt, Rowan Kenrith, and Oracle Envek force a specific opponent to attack with their creatures. However, if for some reason they refuse to attack, then those creatures that didn't attack are destroyed. So it definitely puts them into a tough position. The Oracle is a very interesting card since it punishes liars. Ever feel like someone betrayed your trust by lying about a deal concerning combat? Run Oracle Envek. The best thing about some of these cards is that very few people have ever seen them, let alone played with them, so bonus points for that. War's Toll and Magnetic Web force combat but only if other creatures are attacking. The enchantment has them attack with all the rest of their creatures, while the artifact requires some slow burn setup. That being said, at least you can be selective with the artifact while also affecting blockers, which can serve for indirect removal. Angel's Trumpet also punishes players for not attacking. Its trigger doesn't get increased by Isshin, but it's still a good way to punish opponents for not attacking. Keep in mind that this only counts untapped creatures that didn't attack, so any mana dorks or other utility creatures tapped down but not attacking won't be counted by the Trumpet. Like Rowan Kenrith, Gideon Yura is another planeswalker that forces attack. However, Gideon decides to gorilla smack his chest and have that opponent attack him with their creatures. So while you're safe from combat damage, not Gideon. However, this is still a great way to trigger all detrimental effects that trigger on combat, as well as some beneficial ones for us. One great example is Mila Crafty Companion. Yet another way you can build Isshin, which I won't get too deep into here since I'm already presenting two different builds, is to make the most of those attack deterrent and pillow fort effects while also having a Super Friends sub-theme. That way your planeswalkers are protected while you're also causing bedlam and pandemonium to your opponents. Mila thus takes it a step further by putting a loyalty counter on each planeswalker you control if an opponent were to attack any of them. You can also cast Mila as Lukka Wayward Bounder if you prefer his effects, especially if you are building that Super Friends version. However, if that is the route you're going with, Mila is better. Unless you cast Lukka, manage to ultimate him, sending him to the graveyard, and then reanimate him as Mila after getting his emblem. Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, and Slumbering Dragon are some more excellent attack deterrents that can also go well in a Super Friends build. Kazul attacks his attackers or you get blockers for them, so this is amazing against Weenie and Tokens decks. The dragon becomes a huge threat for just 1 red mana initially. If you're forcing opponents to attack you, that'll make it huge in no time. But it can also be used inconsequentially. It's a shame that Davriel's Soul Broker is only available as a digitally exclusive card. His +1 is a great attack deterrent since they're either discard a card or sacrifice an attacking creature, which is a pretty good attack deterrent. His -2 is a pretty interesting effect as well, albeit too chaotic for some players. I find it fun though. However, if Davriel were to ever be reprinted in cardboard, he'd be insta-banned a la Loot Tree, since his -3 can potentially lock a commander out of a game, which goes against the spirit of the format. But this is just a curiosity, so let's continue with the actual cardboard options. Mangara the Diplomat, Search the Premises, and Cunning Rhetoric deter opponents not via vinegar but honey. Some opponents would rather be hurt for their actions than helpful to their opponents. Both of these effects help give you card advantage, which is the last thing any player wants to give their opponent. Since they trigger on attack, Isshin increases these effects, which is even better for us. In fact, Cunning Rhetoric is even more annoying since it gives you card advantage from their own deck. If there's anything Commander players hate more than their opponents drawing cards, is their opponents stealing their stuff, so why not both? These are some excellent additions. Speaking of opponents rather being hurt than helpful, Blood Reckoning, Circle of Flame, Hissing Miasma, Marquesa's Decree, and Revenge of Ravens do just that. Getting pinged by 1 for each attacker might seem like a slow burn, but Isshin increases these triggers, so any opponents playing wide instead of tall won't be able to send a wave of attackers our way without potentially dying in the process, before the declare blocker step even happens, so they do have their merit. Or you can also damage the attackers altogether with Caltrops and Powerstone Minefield. These trigger on attack, so Isshin can essentially double that damage. This can help Weenies and Tokens be kept at bay, while also hurting bigger creatures in order to get killed off by smaller blockers. Do keep in mind that these two cards are symmetric, so they also hurt your own attackers. Speaking of killing off attackers with blockers, Brutal Horde Chief just does that. If you're puppeteering your opponents into attacking each other, you can activate the Horde Chief to choose which creatures will do the blocking. Not only does this provide some more manipulation for those of you with the desire to control your opponents outside of blue, but the Horde Chief also has a pain effect trigger when you attack with your creatures. So it's yet another effect like Calculating Lich, but for your own creatures. Oh, and you gain life to boot. Speaking of gaining life, Patron of the Kitsune and Righteous Cause lets you be cheeky and gain life all while you're manipulating your opponents and making them attack each other. This really sets you up when it comes down to you versus the surviving opponent. After duking it out with your other two opponents, there's no way they'll have enough resources or life to beat you in a war of attrition. So these effects are actually pretty handy. Or one glaring obvious thing that you can do is attempt to prevent your opponents from attacking you altogether. Norn's Annex, Archangel of Tithes, Archon of Absolution, Baird Steward of Argive, Windborn Muse, Koskin Falls, Ghostly Prison, and Sphere of Safety tax attackers. Norn's Annex can also potentially serve as yet another harmful effect if that player were to want to attack you but doesn't play white. They'd have no choice but to pay 2 life per attacker. So this also punishes players who think that white is too bad a color to play with. Keep in mind that not all of these prevent planeswalkers from being attacked though. So while it will cost them mana to attack you, not necessarily your planeswalkers, if you're going for a Super Friends build, so keep that in mind. Crawl space is another amazing pillow fort effect since it essentially funnels how many creatures can attack you. This might not deter opponents with Voltron commanders or really large creatures, but combined with effects that have them sacrifice attackers or damage them in some way so as to kill them, and it does wonders. Or you can use lands like Core Haven, Labyrinth of Skolphos, Maze of Ith, and Mystifying Maze to remove an attacker from combat altogether. Not only is this helpful against any attacker that slipped through the cracks, but also against any Voltron tactics. Now again, while this method of building around Isshin is not the focus of my video, if you do want to see a possible deck list for a Pillow Fort Puppeteer build of Isshin, like I'm suggesting here, comment down below. If enough people like the video, I will post a link to this version in the description. Alright, now on to the second nature of this deck, us being the aggressor. This is probably why Isshin is called Isshin 2 Heavens as one, since you can either run him as forcing others to attack for gain, or to improve your own attack effects, or ideally, finding a nice balance of both. So while I glossed over a more manipulative, with some implications to also building a Super Friends version with it, here is the build I focus more of my time on. So let's start with making our attackers more dangerous. Crown of Doom, Fervent Charge, Sublime Archangel, Marton Stromgald, and Adriana Captain of the Guard do just that. However, I already discussed Crown of Doom, so let's focus on the other 4 cards. Fervent Charge is just too good to pass up. On curve, you can cast this after Isshin, and then all of your attackers get a potential +4/+4 thanks to him. Even Isshin. Even if you cast this after him, then he's going to already be swinging for 7-8 by turn 4, possibly sooner. Sublime Archangel can further help with that go tall strategy, but only if you also have the potential for going wide. Isshin makes Exalted trigger twice, so this will work even with a few amount of creatures. If you attack with a single creature towards an opponent who can block it, that creature is essentially getting +2/+2 for each creature you control. In and of itself, that might be enough to take out an opponent, even less effort if it's commander damage. Martin can't pump himself, and it's a bit risky to use him because he's got to be attacking in order for his effect to trigger. However, this is sort of like an inverted Exalted. All of your attackers will get +1/+1 for each attacking creature besides Martin. Thanks to Isshin, it's +2/+2. So if you attack with 5 creatures along with Martin, each of them would get +10/+10 thanks to Isshin. Definitely nothing to scoff at. Adriana has an effect similar to Sublime Archangel in that she gives melee to your other creatures. Thanks to Isshin, if you spread the love by attacking all 3 of your opponents each combat, each of those attackers get a whopping +6/+6. Now imagine attacking with even just a couple of these effects on the board. You can take out the table in no time. Gleam of Battle is an absolutely busted pump effect here. It has the potential of being even better here since the creatures get a +1/+1 counter instead of a temporary pump. Thanks to Isshin, that's 2 +1/+1 counters. These definitely add up, especially if we get multiple combat steps, but we'll see that in a bit. Ankle Shanker and Crashing Drawbridge don't necessarily benefit from Isshin like the previous ones do, especially the Goblin, since we can't get multiple instances of First Strike and Death Touch. That being said, Ankle Shanker gives all of our attackers First Strike and Death Touch, which essentially protects them from any blockers without First Strike or Double Strike. Anything blocking our attackers essentially die before they can even do anything to ours, thus protecting them. Iroa's God of Victory, Loyal Unicorn, and Dolmen Gate do something similar, but in a less oppressive way. While Iroas already makes it harder to block our creatures by giving them menace, he prevents all damage that would be dealt to our attackers, essentially giving us all the incentive to attack and opponents even less incentive to block beyond saving themselves. Similarly, the Unicorn and the Gate prevent damage dealt to our attackers, with the Unicorn having the added bonus of giving them vigilance if we control Isshin. Reconnaissance is another way to protect our attackers while still getting those sweet attack triggers, potentially increased by Isshin. We can remove blocked creatures from combat, preventing them from death, but we can also remove attackers that already dealt combat damage during the end of the combat step. This card is crazy good here and makes it very difficult for opponents to decide which creatures to block. Plus, we get untapped blockers for their turns. So good. Rogue's Passage is another way to protect our attackers by making them outright unblockable, especially for any creature with an attack trigger we want to happen while protecting it, such as the case with Marton Stromgald. However, this can very easily give us the one-shot commander kill with Isshin if we have all of those pump effects in play, especially from Sublime Archangel, or we can get that commander kill in various combat steps thanks to Aurelia the War Leader and Ryu Storm's Edge. Not only do additional combat steps give us more opportunities to trigger our effects that do so on declaration of attackers, but those things carry over. For example, any pump effects that last until the end of the turn will remain during those additional combat steps, so each combat our surviving attackers are even bigger. These 2 cards are beyond good here. Another way to make the most of the deck's aggression is by spitting out more attackers. Grave Titan, Krenko Ting Street Kingpin, and Tilonali Summoner do this in spades since it's when they attack. Thanks to Isshin, Grave Titan creates 4 untapped zombie tokens each time it attacks. It being a 6/6 with Death Touch gives it quite the block deterrent. Krenko is even more busted with Isshin. He first gets a +1/+1 counter and then creates as many untapped goblin tokens as his power. But then he gets another +1/+1 counter and then creates even more untapped goblin tokens. Krenko is so busted with Isshin in play. The Summoner is the only one that doesn't really benefit from Isshin since it's just a mana sink, so it makes no sense to pay that red again. However, it's just that, an amazing mana sink that creates a ton of tapped attacking 1/1s, which don't leave if we have the City's Blessing. Keep in mind that these tokens won't trigger any effects since they're created already tapped and attacking. However, that won't stop them from triggering things during a following combat step. Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, also creates tokens but via a Pillow Fort effect. However, I already discussed Kazul in the previous section, so let's move along. Hum of the Host is another amazing way to create more creature tokens, especially since they're non-legendary copies. Obviously, the best creature to equip this to is Isshin. This will make our attack triggers happen a 3rd time, which is just crazy. If we have multiple combat steps that turn, we get even more insanity. That being said, the true best target for Helm of the Host will always be Aurelia. This gives us infinite combat steps because the non-legendary token of Aurelia has haste and hasn't attacked already. So when she attacks, we'll get an additional combat step. So we'll get infinitely many of those attack triggers that help us win the match, just in case infinite Aurelia tokens isn't enough for that. Another amazing way to capitalize on Isshin, giving us additional attack triggers, is via interaction. Lucille, Archon of Cruelty, and Ulamog's Crusher are so busted here because they force opponents to sacrifice cards on attack. Granted, the creature has to be equipped with Lucille, but you get the gist. The Archon and Crusher are a bit hefty to cast, but the deck does have mana acceleration, so it shouldn't be that difficult to hardcast them. We do have ways to potentially cheat them into play, but we'll see that soon. Bane of Balaged is another beefy creature to cast, but its triggered effect is too good to pass up. Better than Ulamog's Crusher and cheaper to cast too. The defending player has to exile 2 permanents, which is much worse than sacrificing 2 via Annihilator. However, thanks to Isshin, it's 4 permanents to be exiled. Super oppressive. Brutal Horde Chief is another amazing interaction piece since we can force blocks and kill creatures that way, but I already discussed it in the previous section. Continuing on, Siege Dragon and Tyrant's Familiar are some more ways to deal with creatures. Siege Dragon is a bit niche at only destroying walls when it enters the battlefield, but I bet you'll love knowing you have it in your 99 when facing an Arcades Sabbath deck. That being said, when it attacks, it deals 2 damage to each non-flying creature the defending player controls if they have no walls. Isshin making this deal 4 damage is way more significant. The Familiar only works if we have Isshin, but that's the point anyways. A 7/7 flyer with haste for 7 mana is already good, but being able to deal 7 damage to a creature will more than likely kill it. With Isshin, it's going to be 14 to the same creature or 7 to 2 creatures. These are a bit hefty to cast, but again, we'll see how that's not really an issue. Pharrell's Mantle provides a similar effect but as an aura that you can enchant to any of your creatures. It'd be interesting to see how many of you even knew this enchantment existed. Let me know in the comments if you did. In any case, I started playing in Fallen Empires, so this card immediately came to mind. Being able to deal X+2 damage to a creature whenever the enchanted creature attacks and isn't blocked is so good, especially with Isshin. So enchanting a creature with evasion is key. The enchanted creature won't deal combat damage, but that's fine. The whole point is to snipe creatures, while also doing it in style and having everyone at the table ask what the hell you just cast and how the hell it works. The true joy of playing Commander. Anyhow, Thundering Raiju is another amazing effect along this vein since it deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control. However, that isn't big of an issue since it puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature when it attacks. If we control Isshin, then this is similar to Krenko, so do the best to perform the triggers correctly when you play. You first put the +1/+1 counter, then deal the damage to opponents. Then you do it an additional time. In other words, once again you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature and then deal X damage. You do not put 2 counters and then deal X twice. Same with Krenko. You don't put 2+1 counters, then make goblins twice. It has to be done in the correct order. The Haunt of Hightower also provides a disruptive effect via discard. The best thing about this legendary vampire is that it triggers on attack and not combat, so we can have the defending player discard 2 cards. As a bonus, this thing gets even bigger when cards are being put into opponents' graveyards from anywhere, so it's not just when they discard cards. It also triggers when their creatures die, when they sacrifice permanents, when they're milled out, and even when their instants and sorceries resolve. So good. Chaos Warp and Generous Gift are the deck's catch-all interaction pieces. You can never go wrong with including these since they can hit absolutely anything at instant speed for just 3 mana. As for how we're going to be drawing into all this interaction, Isshin can also help with that. Mangara the Diplomat, Search the Premises, and Cunning Rhetoric can do so defensively whether we're attacked by opponents. However, I already explained these cards, so let's move along. Greven Predator Captain and Chief Jim Hopper give us card advantage on attack. Greven requires us to sacrifice another creature in order to draw cards equal to that creature's power, but we lose life equal to its toughness. But that's still okay since Greven's power gets pumped by how much life we've lost that turn. The good thing about creating so many creature tokens is that it's fuel for Greven. If that sacrifice fodder also happens to be much bigger due to our pump effects, then we draw into even more cards. Even if the token is still weak, it's still okay because Greven triggers an additional time thanks to Isshin. Hopper is another busted card advantage engine, but it's not strict card draw like Greven. Instead, he creates clue tokens that we then have to crack for 2 to draw a card. However, since the deck is aggressive, he'll be investigating a lot, especially since he triggers again thanks to Isshin. Karasakar the Eye Tyrant is another way to draw cards off of attack triggers, but from creatures we goaded with its ability, which has the potential of being a ton of cards if we controlled Isshin, both for Karasakar's first trigger as well as its second trigger. However, I already explained Karasakar, so let's move along. Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are included since the deck draws into so many actual cards. While the deck is 3-colored, these aren't that taxing to include since neither really take up a slot in the deck. You could even add E-Honda Sumo Champion if you wanted to as another way to pump your creatures. However, it would be their toughness because they'd be dealing combat damage based on toughness rather than power. That being said, thanks to Isshin, they'd get pumped +0/+X an additional time, making them super strong if you have a fat enough hand. Robber of the Rich isn't necessarily card advantage in the sense of actually drawing us cards, but we do impulsively draw from an opponent's deck, which is always fun for us but annoying for opponents. As annoyed as they might be from the potential of us playing with their cards, it's their fault for having more cards in their hand than us. So suffer that sweet Robin Hood justice. Etali Primal Storm does it better since it steals it from everybody's top deck. Not only that, but you can free cast them at that moment, bypassing any timing restrictions. Oh, and it's also a 6/6 for 6 mana if that weren't enough. Etali is super strong with Isshin in play. Similarly, Fireflux Squad and Winota Joiner Forces are even better than strict card draw since we're cheating creatures directly onto the battlefield. Fireflux Squad requires us to exile an attacking creature to its trigger, so I guess it's a good thing we're creating tokens that can serve as fodder for it. Imagine exiling a 1/1 Goblin or Elemental and then revealing cards from your library until you reveal Bane of Balaget, Ulamog's Crusher, or Tyrant's Familiar. Granted, they won't have their attacks triggers trigger, but we still avoided casting them, plus they're huge beaters that will still be dealing combat damage. Then, next turn or next combat step, we can then get their attack triggers. Winota is utterly disgustingly broken here. While there are only 9 other humans in the deck, excluding Isshin, Winota has us dig 6 cards deep for each non-human creature attacking. Since 28 other creatures in the deck are non-human, plus none of the tokens we're creating are humans, we can very easily dig through our library in a single combat step until we cheat in all the humans in the deck. Oh, and thanks to Isshin, we dig 6 deep, then 6 deep again for each non-human attacker. This means that in a single combat step, even if Isshin and Winota were our only other humans on the battlefield, we can potentially get the rest of them from our entire library onto the battlefield, being Adriana, Hopper, Mangara, Martin, Ryu, Fireflux Squad, Robber of the Rich, and Tilonali's Summoner. We can also use Isshin's ability to make the most of defensive effects like Recovery and Reanimation. Creatures like Drana the Last Blood Chief, Olivia Crimson Bride, and Sun Titan, which are already good on their own, become that much better thanks to Isshin. Both Drana and Olivia reanimate creatures from our graveyard. Olivia does have the creature enter tapped and attacking, which is great for still being able to deal combat damage, but we do not get any attack triggers from it. However, the true downside is that the reanimated creature gets exiled if we don't control a legendary vampire. Sun Titan is just epic here. While it's limited to relatively low CMC, we can still use it to reuse fetch lands, which is essentially land-based mana wrap, something desperately needed outside of green decks. Enduring Angel also helps us by keeping us alive if we were to die. Some opponents might decide to go after us even through all of our deterrents. You know what kind of players I'm talking about. Those stubborn players who don't like being nudged into someone else's direction. The simple fact that you have pillow fort effects or other attack deterrents just make them want to attack you more than anyone else, even if it's a pain to do so. So this angel helps us there, as well with anything else that would draw our life to 0, like direct damage, draining, etc. Then, when it transforms, it loses double strike, but it gains the ability to gain its life, as well as having its power and toughness be equal to our life. We'd be starting at 3 life, but if it's attacks with Isshin in play, we go to 6 life, then 12 life in a single combat step, making it a 12-12 flyer before blocks. If it sticks around, or if we have additional combat steps, we can get insane levels of life, making it even harder to take us out of the match. Eldrazi Displacer is an absolute beast in this deck for so many reasons. For one thing, it can blink a potential attacker that made it through our defenses, return it to the battlefield tapped, which stops it from blocking during someone else's turn too. It can also blink one of our creatures in response to a targeted effect, providing more levels of defense. It can even be used to reset the previously mentioned Angelic Enforcer. If we were to die by reaching 0 or less life, we can blink it in response so that it returns as Enduring Angel, prevents us from dying, and then transforms back into Angelic Enforcer. We can also use a Displacer to reset the creatures reanimated by Olivia, thus taking away that exile clause. However, one epic way of using Eldrazi Displacer is in conjunction with Ilharg the Raise board, another way to cheat high casting costs of our creatures. The creature that Ilharg sneaks in returns to our hand afterwards. However, if we blink it with Eldrazi Displacer, it won't return to our hand at the end of the turn because it's a different instance of that creature. So good. Again, keep in mind that with the way Ilharg works, the creature being snuck in will not have its attack trigger since it enters the battlefield already attacking. Boros Charm, Teferi's Protection, and Flawless Maneuver are included as the deck's straight-to-the-point defensive effects. Last thing we want is some board wipe setting us back, so these ubiquitous includes don't really need any further explanation than that. As for being able to cast all these things and power the deck, you guessed it, Isshin can even help with that. Goldspan Dragon, Hoarding Ogre, and Shiny Impetus can help with that by creating treasure tokens with their attack triggers. However, I already discussed how the impetuses work, so let's focus on the first two. The dragon, while super expensive now, will hopefully drop in price when rotating out of standard because it's so good. Not only will it create 2 treasures on attack thanks to Isshin, but it also creates the treasures when it's the target of a spell. If that weren't enough, this 4/4 flyer with haste for just 5 mana doubles the output of our treasures. However, we crack a treasure, we get double the mana. The ogre isn't as impressive, but at the very least it creates 2 treasures with Isshin if we get a low roll on the die. However, be aware of how it works with Isshin. We don't get double the amount of treasures. We simply roll the d20, determine the number of treasures, then roll the d20 again, and once more determine the number of treasures. Orcish Squatters, like Pharrell's Mantle, is probably a card most of you have never even heard about. If you have, let me know in the comments. In any case, this is a land-based ramp via Thievery. If it attacked and wasn't blocked, we get to steal a land from the defending player. With Isshin, we get to steal 2 lands. Granted, they can't be blocked for it to happen, but we do have ways to make it unblockable. Or we can just get rid of any potential blockers with the rest of the effects of the deck. Keep in mind that our attack triggers all resolve before opponents can even choose blockers. So if we manage to kill off any potential blockers, then the squatters will essentially be unblocked and thus trigger, getting us them lands. Sword of the Animus is some more land-based ramp and should be the first card you put in this deck's 99. Thanks to Isshin, this will trigger twice, ramping us for 2 basic lands. This card does some work. While we do have ways of cheating fatties onto the battlefield, whether from our hand, library, or graveyard, this does help us cast them honestly. Same with the deck's mana rocks: Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, Arzhov Signet, Rakdos Signet, Talisman of Conviction, Talisman of Hierarchy, and Talisman of Indulgence. With the deck being non-green, we need all the help we can in terms of mana acceleration. At the very least, these can start at the early game while we start ramping, stealing lands, creating treasures, etc. Assuming we're not cheating those fatties. Urborg to move Yawgmoth and Cabal Coffers also help us cast those expensive spells, since there really aren't any spells too color intensive in the deck beyond maybe Aurelia. But these lands can help us generate a ton of mana. At the very least, Urborg can make our fetch lands tap for mana if we've already fetched for everything we can, if Sun Titan is also returning a fetch land each combat step. Speaking of which, the rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 9 fetch lands, all 3 shock lands, all 3 snow duels, all 3 opponent lands, Savai Triumph, Command Tower, Reflecting Pool, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 3 of each basic land to make the most of Sword of the Animus. As I've mentioned recently before, I will no longer be recommending players run dual lands in their decks. That being said, you can definitely swap them in for the snow duels if you already have them, are playing online, or are fine with proxying them. Similarly, you can also make this deck much cheaper to build if you swap out the more expensive lands like the Fetch lands, Reflecting Pool, and Ancient Tomb for budget alternatives. The decks should still run well enough. This brew is just an idea of how to roll around Isshin 2 Heavens as one. Well, 2 ideas, since I do present an alternate way of building Isshin in the first half of the video. And that's honestly what I love most about Isshin. He's not super defined into a single playstyle. You can build him around the defensive effects or aggressive effects, or a combination of both. You can use the aggressive effects with some defensive effects to protect yourself after you attack. Or you can focus mostly on defense to protect your heaviest hitters or your squad of super friends if you want to go with that. Such a great commander. I almost feel sorry for Wolfgar, who was released only a couple of months ago. If you're interested in the decklist of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. However, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you'd like me to flesh out a build that's more defensive than offensive, like the video. If enough people want it, I'll add it. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Better Kirby, and happy brewing.